The story opens in the kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet at all, an uneasy stillness before a storm. And in that silence, one voice cuts through everything. No one's coming to rescue you. Those were the words that would follow her for years, the words she had heard too many times in the places no maps acknowledged. But now they were whispered inside her own mind as she stepped off the transport aircraft and onto the cracked runway of Fort Hawthorne. Before she even took 3 steps, she could feel the looks: distrust, doubt, misjudgment. It wasn't new to her, but today she needed to stay colder, quieter, more invisible than usual. Because today, she was here for a reason no one on this base had the famous clue about. Welcome to United War, where stories aren't just told, they're uncovered. And this story? This one begins with a medal. A simple medal. A medal the commander of this base would soon take from her hands in front of a room full of soldiers, not knowing he was humiliating someone who outranked him, outtrained him, and outran more nightmares than he could imagine. Because she was not just a soldier. She was Black Ops, and he had no idea. To everyone else, she looked like a quiet, slightly too serious sergeant. Fresh transfer, no history, no reputation. Just another body assigned to this remote base, swallowed by desert and bad decisions. Her uniform was clean, her posture was stiff. Her eyes were the only thing that hinted otherwise. The kind of eyes that had watched things burn in the dark. The kind that had memorized the silence of people who never made it home. When she walked past the command building, soldiers barely looked up. A few nodded. One of them, a corporal barely holding his rifle right, laughed under his breath, nudging a friend. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know where she had been. To them, she was just another new face. New faces meant easy targets for quick jokes. But she didn't react. She never reacted. Out there, in the real war, reaction was how you gave away your position. Here, it was how you gave away your advantage. Inside the base, Commander Ross was pacing in his office, boots hitting the floor with the rhythm of frustration. He was a man who believed authority was something shown by volume, not by discipline. Everyone on the base had learned that the hard way. His temper was famous. His leadership was not. A row of medals hung behind him, each perfectly polished, each perfectly spaced. His office was a shrine to himself. And today, in the hands of a quiet arriving sergeant, was a medal he believed he deserved. The moment she walked into the administrative center to check in, he spotted her from the hallway and raised his voice so the room would hear. "You're the new transfer? The one from—" He paused, scanning her file with visible annoyance. "From a blacked-out section? What kind of joke is this?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, calm, hands behind her back, breathing slow. He didn't like that. He stepped closer, grabbing the medal attached to her file, a small black and silver insignia. Most people didn't recognize it. Most people weren't supposed to. But Ross held it between his fingers like a cheap souvenir. "This," he said loudly, "must be some mistake. You don't earn medals like this unless you've done something significant." He smirked. "And somehow, I doubt you have." A few soldiers looked up from their paperwork. Some snickered. Others glanced away uncomfortably. The sergeant's jaw tightened for a half-second, but her voice stayed even when she spoke. "Permission to retrieve my property, sir." He laughed, that ugly, dismissive laugh that echoes through a room like broken glass. "Property?" he said, raising the medal higher, as if testing her patience. "I don't think you understand. Here, respect is earned. And this," he shook the medal lightly, "this is going to stay with me until I know who you are, and why you think you deserve it." She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. The silence around her felt heavier than the desert heat outside. Ross leaned back slightly, uncomfortable for a split second, because he expected her to break, to argue, to be intimidated. But she simply watched him, almost studying him. and that unnerved him more than the toughest soldier ever had. The truth was, she had been trained to withstand interrogation by men far more dangerous than Ross. She had sat in dark rooms under harsher lights. She had smiled at threats that would have shattered ordinary soldiers. She had held her breath under freezing water until her lungs almost collapsed. She had been dropped behind enemy lines without backup and told, "No one's coming to rescue you, so rescue yourself." Ross wasn't even on her radar. As she walked out of the office, medal taken, dignity intact, she overheard him complaining loudly to his second-in-command. "These transfers, always thinking there's something special. I'll break that attitude real quick." She almost smiled. Almost. That night, she sat alone in the dimly lit barracks, lacing her boots with slow precision. Soldiers laughed in the corridor. Radios hummed. The base smelled like sweat, metal, and dust. She loosened the collar of her uniform to reveal the faint outline of a patch hidden beneath it. The Black Ops insignia, only those who had survived the program were allowed to wear. 5 operations, 3 countries, 0 failures. She wasn't here to be liked. She wasn't here for the medal. She wasn't even here for Ross. She was here because someone high above Ross had sent her. Someone who didn't deal in mistakes. Someone who signed orders in ink the color of silence. Tomorrow morning, this base would be tested in a way none of them were prepared for. She knew. Ross didn't.
Morning came harsh and early at Fort Hawthorne. The sun rose like a blade, cutting through the dry haze that hung over the base. Most soldiers woke up groggy, rubbing the sand from their eyes. But she woke up already focused, sitting on the edge of her bunk with her boots tied and her mind calculating. Today wasn't just another day of drills. She had received a coded message in the night, a transmission only her former unit would recognize. It was brief. It was cold. It was enough to confirm what she already suspected. Something was coming. By the time she stepped onto the training field, the base was alive with noise. Soldiers jogged in formation, radios crackled, engines rumbled from the motor pool. She blended in effortlessly, her expression unreadable, even as whispers followed her. They spoke about the incident with Commander Ross, about the medal he had snatched from her hands, about the way she hadn't reacted to his attempts to humiliate her. Some thought she was weak. Others thought she was strange. None of them realized they had walked past someone who had once infiltrated an enemy fortress under the alias of a dead soldier. Someone who had rescued 3 hostages by herself after the mission team was compromised. Someone who had completed operations that would never be spoken of publicly, not for 1,000 years. The colonel spotted her during the morning briefing. Ross walked up with that same swagger he always wore, the kind built on ego rather than accomplishment. He made a show of smirking at her in front of the gathered soldiers. "Well, good morning, Sergeant. I hope you're ready to earn your place here. We've got a long day ahead." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." He wanted more. He wanted defensiveness, apology, discomfort, something he could use to feel powerful. But she gave him nothing, and that bothered him more than disrespect ever could. Drills began with weapons handling. She completed every task precisely, with no wasted motion. Her form was almost too perfect, polished, controlled, efficient. The kind of movement that comes not from training manuals, but from experience written in scars and sleepless nights. Corporal Jennings, the same guy who had laughed at her on arrival, muttered under his breath, "Who moves like that? She's not normal." His friend elbowed him. Maybe she was a sniper or something. She heard both comments, but pretended she didn't. Instead, she focused on breathing, on listening, on watching every corner of the field. She wasn't looking at the soldiers. She was studying escape routes, blind spots, structural weaknesses. Black Ops training rewired the mind. Every place becomes a potential battlefield, every shadow a possible threat. Ross walked the line of soldiers, barking out instructions. When he got to her, he paused. "You think you're special, don't you?" "No, sir." He grinned. "Oh, but you act like you are. Standing there all calm, all quiet. People like you always break first." She didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply waited for him to walk away. And he did, although not before giving her a final glare as if trying to intimidate a wall of steel. But everything changed when the sirens suddenly screamed to life. It happened so abruptly that even the seasoned soldiers jumped. The blaring alarm echoed across the training field, bouncing off metal and stone, vibrating through their boots. Ross spun around, shouting, "What the hell is that? Who triggered that alarm?" A young radio operator sprinted from the command post, panic in his eyes. "Sir, we've detected unauthorized movement near the north perimeter. Possible hostile drones." The words hit the base like a shockwave. Soldiers scrambled. Officers shouted orders. The calm training atmosphere dissolved into confusion. And amid all the chaos, she stood still, watching the horizon. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. This was exactly what her coded message had warned her about. An attack, or a test, or both. Something designed to expose weaknesses. Ross panicked. It wasn't obvious at first, but she saw it in his hands, a subtle tremor. In his breathing, too quick, too shallow. He wasn't used to real emergencies. He liked the idea of being in control, but he had never been truly tested. "Get everyone to defensive positions. Move, move." Soldiers rushed in different directions, but there was no coordination, no structure, no plan, a disaster waiting to unfold. She stepped forward, calm, focused. "Sir, recommend shutting down the west generators. If those drones are armed, they'll target power first." Ross snapped at her. "You don't give orders here." "It's not an order," she said quietly. "It's a fact." He stepped closer, trying to intimidate her. "You're out of line, Sergeant." In the distance, a faint buzzing grew louder. Drones. More than one. Maybe more than 5. She turned her head slightly toward the sky. Her voice remained soft. "Sir, we are running out of time." Ross opened his mouth to argue, but then the sky shifted. Black spots appeared against the bright morning light. The soldiers saw them too. Guns moved upward. Breath caught. Fear tightened the air. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission. She grabbed the nearest radio from a stunned soldier and spoke into it with a tone so calm and commanding that even Ross froze. "Activate shield protocol. Shut down west generators. Reroute comms through backup frequencies. All units fall into grid formation Bravo." Every soldier around her jerked slightly, surprised. Not just at her voice, but how instinctively they obeyed. Ross finally snapped out of it. "Give me that radio." She handed it over immediately. No resistance, no challenge, because she didn't need to fight him. The sky was about to do that for her. The drones descended lower, enough for everyone to see they were armed. Ross's face lost a shade of color. "Everyone take cover, now!" The base erupted in chaos once more. But through the noise, through the panic, through the shouting, she kept her eyes fixed on the approaching threat. She knew how this would end. She had seen it too many times before. This wasn't about drones. This was about who would lead when everything fell apart. And she already knew. It wouldn't be Ross. Not today. Not ever. She tightened her gloves, exhaled slowly, and prepared herself for what was coming next. Because the real test hadn't even begun. And when it arrived, the base would learn the truth. No one was coming to rescue them. Except her.
The buzzing grew louder, turning into a mechanical roar that pressed into the chest of every soldier on the field. Dust shook from the roof tiles, windows rattled, radios crackled, and in the middle of all of it, she walked steadily toward the command bunker while everyone else scrambled like a kicked anthill. It wasn't fearlessness, it was muscle memory. Black Ops didn't panic. They evaluated, they adapted, they survived. Ross sprinted beside her, shouting chaotic orders into the radio, his voice cracking each time the drones dipped lower. Soldiers dove behind vehicles, others ran for cover behind sandbags, and a few stood frozen, rifles trembling in their hands. She saw everything as if the world had slowed down. Each drone's trajectory, each blind spot, each exposed flank, each gap in the base's defense. She didn't need a map. The entire layout of Fort Hawthorne was already committed to memory. It had taken her 5 minutes to study it when she arrived, 5 minutes to memorize every exit, every choke point, every vulnerable angle. That was the difference between her and them. She was always preparing for a threat, even before anyone else knew there was one. The first drone swooped lower, scanning the ground with an infrared sensor. Soldiers gasped, ducked, cursed. Someone fired too early, a panicked shot that whizzed into empty sky. Ross yelled at him, "Hold your fire! Hold!" A second drone tilted sharply, as if acknowledging the gunshot. That was the trigger. Sirens wailed again, this time deeper, harsher, desperate. And then she saw it. A small blinking red light on the lead drone. Not an explosive, not a camera. A signal jammer. Someone wasn't trying to bomb the base. Someone was trying to blind it. Ross barked into his radio. "We're losing comms. Signal dropping. Someone respond." His voice dissolved into static. She stepped forward, grabbing his arm. "Sir, they're jammers." He looked at her as if she'd spoken in another language. "What?" "They're disabling your communication network. This is a probe, a test run." Ross tried to speak, but his radio died entirely. His eyes widened. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cooling desert wind. He looked around helplessly, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do. She was already moving. "Corporal Jennings," she called out firmly. Jennings, crouched behind a vehicle and visibly shaking, snapped his head up. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, Sergeant." "Get the jamming frequencies on the backup tablet in the command bunker. Now!" He hesitated only a second before sprinting away, dropping his rifle in the sand and not even realizing it. Ross ran after her. "You can't order my men around." "They're not orders," she said without turning around. "They're survival steps." The drones shifted formation, circling above the base like vultures sizing up the weak. One dipped lower. Soldiers screamed. Someone fired again, and this time the drone responded. It tilted, spun, and deployed chaff like a mocking gesture. They weren't attacking. They were gathering data. She pushed through the bunker doorway and immediately started flipping switches, bypassing the dead radios and connecting the old analog system. She moved like someone who'd done this 100 times, because she had. Ross watched her with a mix of frustration and confusion. How do you even know how to operate that? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her fingers moved with precision, switching frequencies, routing power, adjusting antenna ranges. When the analog panel buzzed to life, the room filled with a faint, comforting hum. Ross stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who exactly trained you?" She ignored the question. It wasn't time for that conversation. And even if it was, Ross wasn't cleared to know the answer. The hum of the panel grew stronger. The screen flickered once, twice, then stabilized. A grainy radar image appeared, showing 3 drones circling in a triangular pattern. Jennings burst into the bunker, panting. "Here, the tablet. You asked." She grabbed it, typing fast. "Thank you." Ross snapped at him. "You take orders from me, not her." But Jennings didn't even look at Ross. Something about the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she didn't panic. It pulled the soldiers toward her instinctively. Jennings swallowed. "Sir, with all due respect, she seems to know what she's doing." Ross glared at him, stunned that one of his own men had spoken back. She zoomed the tablet screen in. "They're scanning your fuel reserves and your generator layout. Classic pre-strike inspection." Ross exhaled shakily. So it's enemy recon? She said, it's someone preparing to hit this base, and they want to know where your blind spots are. Ross looked around the bunker, suddenly very aware of how unprepared he was. Why would anyone target us? We're in the middle of nowhere. That's exactly why. Remote bases get hit first. Less attention, slower response times. The drones began to ascend, rising back into the sunlight as silently as they had come. Jennings whispered, "Are we safe?" She said, "For now, but they'll be back." Ross straightened, trying to regain control. "We'll prepare. I'll get a team together." She turned toward him, not aggressive, but deliberate. "You need to lock down your southern perimeter. You need to reinforce the power grid, and you need to prepare for the possibility of a full breach." Ross blinked.
The sun had climbed high by the time the base began to calm, though the tension hung heavier than ever. Soldiers moved cautiously, checking positions, whispering to one another. But the quiet wasn't true peace. It was a temporary lull. She had already walked the perimeter twice, scanning, listening, mentally mapping every angle, every exposed hatch, every corner where someone could hide and strike. Her instincts hummed with alertness, calm, yet razor-sharp. Commander Ross finally caught up to her near the northern outpost. Sweat streaked his face, and his uniform looked disheveled, as if the morning had aged him by years. You can't just," he stammered. "You can't operate like that without clearance. You could have—" She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Her eyes were steady, unwavering. "I have clearance, from higher than you and from those who expect results, not excuses." Ross's jaw tightened. The color drained from his face. This was the moment he'd been avoiding in his mind. The recognition that she wasn't just a competent soldier. She wasn't even part of the normal chain of command he understood. She was something else entirely. Something dangerous, efficient, and unbound. Soldiers around them whispered nervously. Some had noticed how she moved through the chaos like she owned it. Others hadn't. But those who had felt it deep in their bones. Authority here wasn't given, it was commanded silently, power radiating from her without a word raised. Then the call came over the intercom. The perimeter sensors had detected movement on the southern ridge. Enemy recon or a strike team, it didn't matter. The fact was, someone was testing the base's defenses, and Ross's usual procedures weren't enough. The base had trained under him, but today it was about leadership under fire. She stepped forward. "I will lead the interception team. The rest of you follow my instructions exactly. Hesitation will cost lives." Her calm tone left no room for argument. The soldiers snapped to attention, immediately obeying her without question. Ross's voice cracked as he tried to assert himself. "I am in command here." She didn't answer. She simply looked at him once, a brief, piercing gaze that conveyed everything he needed to understand. Authority doesn't come from ego. It comes from capability. By the time the interception team reached the southern ridge, she had already planned every move. The men followed her silently, trusting her implicitly, even though they barely knew her. She had trained them in minutes, through presence, precision, and the unspoken command that comes from someone who has faced death more times than most people count. The enemy was closer now, shadows moving across the rocky terrain. She crouched behind a jagged boulder and surveyed the approach. 3 on the left, 2 advancing from the ridge, signal jammer in the center. Take them down silently, no shots unless necessary. The soldiers froze. They had been trained for combat, yes, but she had taught them strategy in seconds. They nodded, positions adjusted,
And then, as if choreographed, the first two enemy operatives went down. Quiet, efficient, leaving no trace but the shifting dust. Ross watched from a distance, jaw tight, realization dawning on him. She had done in moments what he would have taken hours to organize, and he had been wrong to doubt her. He had humiliated her, stolen her medal, and assumed ignorance, but the truth was unavoidable now. She was the one in control. After the last operative was neutralized, she surveyed the area calmly. Not a word wasted. Every soldier was in position, accounted for, ready for anything. She had turned chaos into order, fear into efficiency, hesitation into precision. Ross approached her finally, a mix of humility and disbelief on his face. How did you... She didn't let him finish. She raised her hand, handing him back the medal he had taken. This was never about proving myself to you. It was about proving that leadership isn't measured by rank alone. It's measured by action, by preparation, by courage when no one is watching. Ross lowered his head. Soldiers watched silently, many exchanging glances. They understood now. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned. And she had earned theirs in the most difficult way possible, by showing them what true capability looked like under fire. The sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows across the base. She stood alone for a moment, breathing in the wind that carried the faint scent of dust and sweat. Then she turned, looking at the men and women who had once doubted her. We rebuild, we prepare, and we never forget that no one is coming to rescue us. We rescue ourselves, together. Silence settled, not out of fear, but out of comprehension. The base had changed. Command had shifted, not through ego, not through yelling, not through medals or arrogance, but through undeniable competence and quiet authority. Ross stepped aside without a word. He had learned his lesson. Humility had replaced arrogance, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to follow someone worthy of respect. She walked down the main corridor of the base, soldiers snapping to attention automatically, not because they were ordered, but because they chose to honor the presence of someone who had faced unimaginable trials and lived, someone who didn't need acknowledgement, someone who had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that leadership under fire is the ultimate measure of a person's worth. And as the wind swept across Fort Hawthorne, carrying the dust and whispers of the day's events, one thing was certain. No one's coming to rescue you, except her, and that was more than enough. Lena smiled softly,